So hi everyone, my name is Siobhan Pappas and I am the program manager and coordinator for the Childhood Lead program for the state of New Jersey. It is a shame that we are still talking about lead and its effects on children in 2022, going into 2023. We've known that lead is an issue for an extremely long time. And there's really no safe level of lead, and there's no reason for lead to actually be in the body. It can only be harmful. So we have different screening rules and environmental rules in the state of New Jersey than a lot of other states. New Jersey, our childhood lead program is actually considered a model program within the country due to our stringent regulations. We have every single risk factor for elevated blood lead levels in the state of New Jersey, which is the reason why we have such strict rules. In New Jersey, all children are to be screened at ages 1 and 2 through a blood lead test. Some states consider screening to be a questionnaire, like a risk questionnaire. Ours is a blood lead test, and every single child, no matter their demographic, is to be screened with a blood test at ages 1 and age 2. Elevated currently is defined as greater than or equal to 5 micrograms per deciliter of venous whole blood. The CDC has lowered what they consider the new blood lead reference value to 3.5, and that's what we are working on. The state's currently revising our regulations to align with that. The issue is we have a legislative mandate, so ours has to go through the entire legislative process. So it's a long process, but we are currently working on it. If a blood test comes back and it's 10 micrograms per deciliter or higher, then an environmental investigation is actually triggered, where the local health department will also go out and do an investigation to try to find out where the lead is coming from. That's also done if there's 5 to 9 micrograms per deciliter or higher, 1 to 4 months apart. Then we also do the environmental. All children with an elevated blood lead level get in-home nurse case management through the health department at 5 micrograms or higher. Last year, approximately 179,000 children were tested for lead. It is an increase of over 35,000 from the previous year, which is great. During COVID, a lot of kids missed their tests. And that is a problem because that meant that they were not identified. Right now, we use children as the canary in the coal mine to identify lead burden in the home. And fortunately, that's how it is done. We had approximately 3,364 children last year that had elevated blood lead levels. So that means they had 5 or higher. It is a decrease from the previous fiscal year, but we had 16 children hospitalized for chelation. Pre-COVID years, we had approximately 3 children a year would be hospitalized for chelation. Because kids were home more and people were with the stay-at-home orders, they did a lot of in-home renovations, and they may not have been following lead-safe work practices, which meant there was more exposure for kids. Through the entire COVID pandemic, we've had 15 to 16 children per year in a hospital for chelation. Chelation is not good. It is, first, they're away from their families. They're away from that familial bond. They are in hospitals are scary, right? It's a scary, traumatic environment for them. They're being given a very strong drug, which is chelation is meant to pull the lead out of the blood. But it also pulls out other important metals from our bodies that we need for function. And a lot of times with these high chelations, they have to go back multiple times to get chelated again. They also go home with a chelating agent. And if there is lead in the home, they can't go back to their home until that lead is removed. So now they're displaced. So it's a very traumatic, horrible experience. And it has lifelong implications. It's traumatic in the beginning of it, and when they're in the hospital, but it also, lead exposure has lifelong effects on intellect and ADHD, ability to hold a job. And also it has effects on impulse control. So we talk a lot in the lead world about the lead to prison pipeline. And basically what that is if a child has lead exposure and it rewires your brain. And if it rewires the brain for impulse control, meaning you don't have it, and then you go and you get into a fight or something, and you don't have impulse control, so you react, and now you're in prison for a violent crime. And this cycle repeats itself. And so that is actually what the lead to prison pipeline is. Lead exposure increases the risk for violent crime in the future. So why do we screen all children? Why is it important? So New Jersey is only one of 11 states that actually has universal screening and universal reporting. And we have it because we have every single risk factor, right? New Jersey, it's not just a poor person problem, which a lot of times is what we think of, right? Because we're thinking of substandard housing. It's a problem everywhere. It's not just in old paint, it's in a lot of products. And the only way that we can even know that there is lead really right now is that we test kids, and then we know if there is an exposure, and then at least the early detection will lead to early removal of the lead source to prevent further neurological and physiological impacts. So lead is in paint, in residential paint from pre-1978. It is still in current commercial paints, certain paints, such as your bridge paints and your marine paints and varnishes. It's in different cultural products. And if people are following Ayurvedic medicine, right, and especially the practice of Rasa Shastra, then Rasa Shastra actually uses lead in a distillate to treat colic in children. It's occupational, right? So if you are an engineer or an electrician and you're working in, a lot of electricians use lead solder. Lead solder for plumbing is not allowed, but you can still have this occupational exposure with lead solder. Ammunition, bullets are leaded. Residual from leaded gasoline. We don't have lead in our gasoline for our cars anymore, but we still have lead in our avgas. So our aviation gas for our small planes, that is leaded. We have residual from pesticides, imported goods that come in through our ports, our fishing sinkers and lures, old toys and furniture. Then of course we have from the water from pipes, solder, and fixtures. So we got it all. 71% of our housing was built prior to 1978 when lead-based paint was common. Approximately 540 boatyards and marinas, marina paint and varnishes are still leaded. We have 6,609 bridges. Bridges contain lead-based paint. In fact, somewhere in northern Jersey, there was a brand beautiful new playground for kids, and it was under the bridge, and the bridge paint kept flecking off and falling into the playground, and the children were getting exposed. They had to close this beautiful new playground. Also, lead arsenate was used in New Jersey as a pesticide in our apple orchards from 1900 to 1950. 48 to 200 million pounds of lead arsenate was used. So lead is very stable. Everything wants to be lead. So it stays in the ground, and the only way to get it out is actually removal. So the lead arsenate from the pesticides and from the avgas and from the residual from the automotive gas, that all stays in the soil. So when we say legacy, that's actually what we're referring to. I will say that 75% of the childhood lead cases are from old residential paints. It's from opening and closing our windows and our doors. That friction impact makes a whole bunch of dust. Sometimes it's from peeling and chipping paint where kids ingest the actual chips. But most of the time it's from that dust, and then that dust settles all over everything. And I always say that, kids are, well, I usually say my children are the bearers of pestilence and disease. Kids are always touching things and they're putting things in their mouths. And that's a really important part of development. But that dust goes on all of their toys and on the floor, and they're crawling, and then they're putting their hand in their mouth. And that's how most children actually ingest lead. I will also let you know that most lead cannot be, it cannot get into the system through your skin. It has to be either inhaled or ingested. The only lead that can be actually absorbed through the skin is the lead that is used in gasoline, including avgas. We have 25% of our other cases of children with elevated blood levels actually come from cultural practices and products and things other than residential paint, right? So we have our Ayurvedic medicines. If someone follows an Ayurvedic physician, most of the time, as I spoke earlier about Rasha Shastra and Holy Earth. A lot of times there are certain populations who will ingest soil for different reasons, right? So in Hispanic populations tend to ingest the soil when they're pregnant to link their unborn child to their homeland. West African populations tend to ingest the soil to act as a filter, similar to how we use diatomaceous earth for our pool filters. Sometimes they will ingest the earth to actually similar thing, but for pregnancy. So a pregnant woman will ingest this. Other practices and cultural products that can lead to elevated blood levels that we've seen have been coal, kajul, surma, galena, kaolin, calabar, Terra Santa, San Juan. Those are, people use them in their religious practices, and then it can actually, the child, maybe it's on the child's face and they're touching their hands and their face, or maybe it's on the parent and they're touching their hands and their face and then ingesting it. We also have the largest arsenal on the East Coast. And why that is important is because the bigger the bullet, the more lead it has in it. So that is a problem, right? And so what happens is most bullets have lead in the middle, and then they're coated by copper. But if you are, say, a hunter, or if you make your own bullets, and some people do, or maybe you are into skeet shooting or things like that, there's multiple sports and things of that nature, you're exposed to that gunpowder residue a lot, and that's another way that it can be brought into the system. We had approximately 124,280 hunting licenses issued last year. That's a lot of hunting licenses. A lot of times people forget that New Jersey is a very diverse population. So it's not just the city. People do hunt. And in fact, I went to Rutgers and I graduated from Cook, which is, I think it's now the School of Biological Sciences. But a lot of my friends were avid hunters, and for different reasons, right? They enjoyed hunting. Some people were hunters because of the impact of raising cattle on the environment, and things of that nature. Some actually lived completely off the grid and were subsistence. So New Jersey has people from all over the world. So we have a lot of exposure from that. We have people that have all different ways of life. We're not a homogenous population, right? So we should keep that in mind. We have more than 40 gun ranges in New Jersey. 53 airports. That gets me all the time. And I'm a single engine pilot. 53 airports is a lot of airports. No, most of them are very, very tiny. And again, our gasoline for our small planes is what is leaded. Jet fuel isn't. So these little small airports are actually have a dramatic impact. And also for those, I don't know if there are some pilots in the audience there, but one of the things you have to do with your little plane is you take this little container and you put it up into and you drain some of your fuel out. And what you want to see is if there's any water in your fuel line, right? Because that's bad. So you want to make sure you don't have any water in your fuel line when you're up in the air. And which is great because you don't want that. But most of the time what pilots then do is take it and they just throw that little bit of gasoline on the ground and then it becomes runoff. It happens a lot. In fact, that's what I was trained to do when I first started flying planes. I was 17, so it was a very long time ago. It was Marlboro Airport. Marlboro Airport doesn't exist anymore, but that lead in that soil still does. And now we have very expensive homes built on this soil that people may not identify that child has a lead exposure because the house was built after 1978 and it is, an affluent area, but yet there's still that lead exposure there. And also there were apple orchards everywhere around that area at one time. We still have such old infrastructure in New Jersey. We have some of the oldest infrastructure in the country. And that's our old lead service lines, our old fixtures. Up until 1984, your water fixture for, say, like your faucets and things like that could have 8% lead, but still be said that they were lead free. Lead pipes, PVC pipes, which we don't think about, right? With PVC pipes, lead is used as a plasticizer and stabilizer. So there's certain PVC pipes that actually have lead in them, even though they're a plastic. And of course, our lead solder. Electrical solder still has, is still leaded solder. We have a ton of leaded batteries. Even sometimes people don't know how to get rid of their batteries, so they actually bury them in the backyard. We usually have about 1 or 2 cases a year that is from batteries that were buried in the backyard. We have paint from old furniture and toys. I don't know about you guys, but I know when I was pregnant with my son, my mother-in-law desperately wanted for me to take my husband's old crib and bassinet and things like that. But they were leaded. He was 1970. So there was still lead paint being used on those products. And so we didn't, and there was a lot of pressure, but we just didn't do it because we didn't want the lead exposure. And in fact, I did test it to show her that it did contain lead. I don't know if that actually helped her at all. I don't think it did, but people like that, right? People want to, and it makes sense, right? They want to pass down generation to generation, but that old furniture can be a problem for numerous reasons, including the giant spacing in between the crib rails. But these things do happen. We have a lot of ports and we have a very diverse population. So there's a lot of imported goods coming in, such as our spices. Sometimes our old canned goods from other countries, they actually use lead solder on a seal. We don't use it in the United States. We don't have the sealed cans anymore, but some other countries still do. A lot of items made of plastic can actually be leaded. I always admit to this. So we were doing a lead campaign at the state, the childhood lead program, and we got these very cute little red sippy cups that talked about lead on them. And we ordered all of them and we happened to test them, and it turns out they actually were lead. They were leaded. They had a high amount, so we clearly didn't give them out. But we easily purchased them from a major distributor, and they still had lead in them now. So spices also tend to, when the spices that you buy in bulk, we tend to find that those, especially turmeric, have a lot of lead in them. And there can be several reasons. So one of the first reasons is if you're grinding up the spices, United States doesn't allow lead in our spice grinders, but if they're being ground somewhere else in another country, that machinery may have used lead parts, right? It might be, maybe it's lead solder or something that nature, lead for the machinery, and those little flecks can get into the spices. Another way is that the spice industry, actually, if I'm a poor farmer, right, it's always the middleman that makes the most money. If I'm a poor farmer and I am selling my product and it is based on weight, lead is very heavy and very soft. So it's very easy for me to add little flecks of lead throughout my spice bag to make it weigh more so I can get more money. And also, we should know that different plants absorb lead at different levels. So for example, the tomato plants, I'm sorry, I lied. Not tomato plants, mustard plants. Mustard plants absorb lead over 100 times more than most other plants do. So mustard plants have actually been used to remediate lead soil. So if there's a site, the soil has a tremendous amount of lead in it, they plant these mustard plants. Then they harvest the mustard plant, they burn it, and they reclaim the lead. That's how much lead is in that. The mustard plant absolutely absorbs. So it can also be in spices just from that. Children and pregnant women are who are most at risk for lead burden. The ratio of blood level between mother and child is usually around 1:1. It is not the same with breast milk. So the practice for if a mother has an elevated blood level and is breastfeeding, if her blood level is 40 or higher, then she should pump and dump until her blood level goes below 40. But if it is below 40, the mother should continue to breastfeed. Children are the ones who are the highest risk due to hand-to-mouth activity, and so they actually absorb a higher amount of lead when they ingest it than adults. Children absorb about approximately 80%, where adults absorb about 50 or lower, and it actually depends on what you're eating. So as a child grows and they go from formula or breast milk, or I should say breast milk, and the more solid foods that they start to eat, the closer that they come to the adult's absorption rate. The other issue too is that because lead is a neurotoxin and it rewires the brain, we want to find the children who have elevated blood levels before the synaptic pruning occurs in the child. And synaptic pruning occurs in the brain by age 3. So that's why we try to do it at age 1 and age 2. That is our regulation. It is not a recommendation. New Jersey State is actual regulations. So once that pruning occurs, then it's harder for us to combat the effects of lead, right? So we say that if a child does have an elevated blood lead level and before synaptic pruning occurs, we can go and we can really work with that child and get more pathways developed, right? So the more pathways that are there when pruning occurs, the more that the child has after. So that's really our push with children. So adults do not get chelated until a minimum of 80 micrograms per deciliter of venous whole blood, where we actually chelate children at 45 due to the risk for the brain. There is different methods of testing that can occur in the office. We have LeadCare 2 machines, and you get those results. They're point of care testing, and you get those results in 3 minutes. It's just a few drops of blood. The only issue is, just to make sure that everyone knows, we have universal reporting in the state of New Jersey. So every single blood test that is conducted, we need to make sure is being reported to us. And you can contact my program on how to report if you are going to use lead care 2 machines. And again, it's whether it is a normal blood level or an elevated blood level, both still have to be reported. That is why I always like filter paper, because you do the filter paper test, you do the few blood, I think it's 2 to 3 drops of blood, and then you send it to the lab for analysis, and the lab reports it to us. And that's just one less step for a physician's office to do. But that is, you don't get the results in 3 minutes. So if you were doing a some type of health fair, then the lead care 2 machines would be great. If you do filter paper, if you're in office, I would think that filter paper would be easier for the office to do. But again, these are just different methods that can be done. And of course, a venous blood test also. Venous is the gold standard. We do require, just to let everyone know, we do require, if there is an elevated blood level, we require a venous confirmatory, because as we all know, a capillary can be artificially high just due to contamination. We can also make sure that we send reminders to the parent to ensure the compliance with having their child screened at age 1 and age 2. And also just talking to the parent or guardian regarding the importance of testing. A lot of people do not realize that lead is still a problem in New Jersey, and it is a huge problem. When we go down to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter of venous for the blood lead reference value, we're going to have, it will more than double. We're looking at now 6,500 plus children will have an elevated blood level then. So how do we reduce lead exposure? What is how do we do it, right? What can we even tell people to help them? So there's many different things. The easiest thing to do is to remove the dust is wet cleaning. Frequent wet cleaning of the home is amazing. So, because if that dust isn't accessible to the child, it cannot get into their system. So and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Literally wet cleaning with a wet cloth, soap and water, and you can pick up all of that lead dust. When we dry dust and vacuum and sweep and things like that, that dust actually goes into the air. It's distributed into the air, and it takes about an hour, hour and a half for it to settle back down onto the floor. But it will settle. So that's why we always say wet cleaning is best. Making sure that we use lead-free products that are spices and things like that are purchased from places that are reputable, and that we use things that don't actually contain lead. And if we're doing our renovations in our homes ourselves, or if our contractor is doing those renovations, we want to make sure that they're using lead safe work practices in any home that was built prior to 1978. We can also take measures to abate, which is the removal of lead, or remediate, which is making the home lead safe, meaning that lead is intact and it's not coming off of anywhere, and it's not a threat, a home. But that's a lot of money. The New Jersey just adopted a new law that will require all rental properties built prior to 1978 have to have an inspection, a lead inspection before someone moves in, and that will be either a visual or dust wipe sample based on what the percentage of elevated blood levels are in the state. And simple things of just taking off your shoes really helps to ensure that lead dust isn't tracked in from outside, right? So if you have legacy lead in your soil and you're walking around and then your shoes are walking around your house, that's making it accessible and tracking it inside. We also want to make sure that our children have a diet that is very healthy and full of calcium and iron and vitamin C, because this way the lead has nowhere to go, right? So if our bodies treat lead just like it would treat calcium and iron. So if we have plenty of calcium and plenty of iron, then the lead can't really be as readily absorbed. I will say, I know that this is going to sound crazy, but we find interesting cases in the state of New Jersey for lead. So, and I really want to reiterate this because I admit to it. My children's pediatrician, they do not screen appropriately, right? They believe that they don't have the demographic of children that are at risk. And no matter how much public health detailing I do every time I go in, we always have this conversation. It just doesn't necessarily go the way I want it to. But we've had, I mean, multiple cases. It really isn't just poor kids. We do a great job of screening our Medicaid kids in the state of New Jersey. It's awesome. And we're really good at screening our kids one time. We have approximately 92% of children in New Jersey by age 6 have been screened at least once in their lifetime. What we stink at is getting the second test, right? So my physician screens when your child gets their full blood panel, right? So ours was at age 1. That's when they gave it. I know a lot of physicians give it between age 1 and age 2, right? My friend's physician gave it at 18 months. And so but if the child isn't crawling and isn't mobile yet, you're not going to catch whether or not they actually have any kind of exposure to lead. And then you don't know. That's the issue. If we don't know that the child was exposed to lead, and they were, there's nothing that we can do to help prevent or mitigate anything in the future, or to help mitigate any of the adverse effects that the child may see. We've had cases where this was the parents actually were professors, and they were in school housing, and it was this beautiful old home, absolutely stunning, pristine condition. Baby was not crawling, was not walking, but they got a blood test. I think it was 9 months, and that's when the doctor gave the blood test, and the baby came back with an elevated blood level, and no one could figure out where, because this baby was immobile. So how could it be from the home? And they checked the pots and the pans, and they checked the blender because the mom made her own baby food, and they had mom tested everything, and no one could figure out what happened. Finally, they dust wiped the cat. The cat was hopping up on the windowsill that was leaded, and with their nails, and rubbing up against the windowsill. And all that dust was getting on the cat's fur. And then the cat would go over to the baby, and the baby would get all excited and touch the cat and rub the cat and do the open mouth kisses on the cat like all babies do. And that's actually how the baby ingested the lead, was through the cat. They had to dust wipe a cat. And so we have to constantly think out of the box, right? We had another case where it was a multi-million-dollar home, brand spanking new. And the kid had a really, really high elevated blood level, and no one could figure out where and how the child was getting this blood level. Until finally, Dad admitted that he was making his own bullets in the garage. So he was melting lead down, and he was making specialty bullets and he in his garage, and this was now airborne and just flowing through the house every time we opened the door. I mean, it's not like it was, this airtight clean room that he was making the lead in, and he was tracking it in and out because now it's on his clothes. We've had cases where there's a huge specialty fishing business in New Jersey, where fishing lures and also the sinkers are specialty, and they're made in these little boutique fishing shops. And there were cases where they were actually doing it in their garage because they could be home with their kids, and they were tracking into the house, and it was aerated, and that's how the kids got exposed. So I really want to really push the fact that every single child in the state of New Jersey is at risk for an elevated blood lead level. Every single child. They're in contact with lead at some point in time if you live in New Jersey. basically every day, because we're so old. We have old infrastructure. We're very diverse. We just have every single risk factor, even those Takis chips, right? That kids love to eat, and they have the competitions over who can eat the most, the spicy ones, without drinking water. I don't know why that's fun, but apparently that's a fun thing. And so kids do that. And so the Takis chips that were made in Mexico, distributed in the United States, have been linked to elevated blood levels. And sometimes it's the spice on the chip. Sometimes it's actually the ink on the bag of the chip, right? And then the kids, they have that really unhealthy looking color from the spices and the flavoring on the chip that's on their fingertips. And what do kids do? They put them in their mouth and they scrape that off from their teeth, and they can ingest it. But also they've been touching that bag. So that bag now, the dust from the bag, from the ink on the bag, is now in their mouths. We've had cases where a dad was super excited, and he had his son, and he took his son and gave him all of his little Matchbox cars that he'd been saving from his childhood, and son loved him and was so excited and would put them in his mouth, and there was leaded paint on the Matchbox cars. We've had it where sometimes, like old books, the inks will be, or books that have been printed in other countries, the ink will actually be leaded, and kids will put them in their mouths. It's really an issue, right? So it's constantly washing hands of babies and wiping things down to make sure that dust isn't on it, and trying to make sure that things are from reputable sources where it isn't leaded. There was a case in the Midwest where little girl, mom made her birthday cake, and I think she was 2. She might have been 1, but I believe she was 2. And there were these yellow flowers that the mom had decorated, that she ordered online. They were specifically, they were like sugar flowers that for cake decorating. And the little girl ate 52. I don't know how she didn't vomit, but anyway, she ate a whole bunch of them. And it turns out those candy flowers that were put on the cake, the dye used in them to make them was leaded. And that's where she had her elevated blood level and had to be chelated. Now, the company said, yes, but it says that it's for decorative use, not to be ingested, in these tiny little words. Who would have thought that a cake decorating sugar flower would not be edible? I would never have thought of that. So there's a lot of different ways that we can get it. We've had children have, our highest that I've ever seen has been 137 micrograms per deciliter of venous whole blood. He was older also, with vomiting, diarrhea, went to 3 separate hospitals and was sent home from 2 of them with gastroenteritis, stomach flu, a stomach bug, and then the 3rd one admitted him and did a blood lead test and found that he had a blood lead level of 137. When a 5 is elevated, he had 137. That kid required multiple times being chelated. We had one little girl who had 120. By the time she got to the hospital, she was semi-comatose. The first hospital that the mom went to, they said, when she got her blood level back, said, we don't deal with blood lead. So the mom, who doesn't speak English, who has an autistic son at home, who doesn't have a car, got on a bus again, went to another hospital, and that hospital misread the blood lead result and diagnosed her with low elevated blood lead and sent the child home because they read it as 12.0 and not 120. By the time that little girl got to the hospital, she was semi-comatose. This happens in New Jersey, one of the richest states in one of the richest countries in the world. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't have it. The only way that we can fight this is to identify children who have blood lead and then remove it from the home. New Jersey, DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, has enacted the new law for inspection of rental properties. And they also do have many different programs to help people remediate and abate lead in their home. So New Jersey is desperately trying to get rid of lead in the state of New Jersey. So what are we doing, right? And all children in New Jersey who have been identified as having an elevated blood level receive in-home nurse case management through the nurses at the health department. They have, and we get all of the blood lead results, and then it's based on the jurisdiction of where the child resides. The environmental intervention occurs when a child has an elevated blood level of 10 micrograms per deciliter, or 5 micrograms per deciliter through 9 micrograms per deciliter within a 4-month period. We have public and private partnerships to provide healthy homes training to community partners to educate on lead burden and how to reduce exposures. There's a lot of community fairs that go on to provide education regarding risk reduction for lead exposure. We have DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. We work with them to target high-risk areas for lead burden. The DCA ensures all lead abatement contractors are properly certified and that they're following the correct practices. They also have grants for lead abatement and the new lead inspection law. The EPA promotes soil shops for testing garden soil to make sure we're not ingesting lead through our produce that we grow. And our local health departments not only provide the in-home nurse case management and the environmental investigation, but they also provide community-based outreach on lead dangers. We're going to continue, right? The only thing that we can do is provide outreach and education and really on the importance of understanding lead exposure and trying to reduce lead exposure risks. It's not even understood in some medical communities that we still have this risk, right? And my kids have never, I'm the first to admit it, they have never lived in a house that was built after 1978. When we lived in Maryland, our house was from 1899. Risk, right? I have stained glass in my shore house. There is a piece of glass over the top of that stained glass so that even if it flicks off, you can't, there is no dust, right? Because it's actually encased in regular glass also. This is something that we will continue to fight for many years, but we make slow progress as time goes on, and that's what we can hope for. We desperately need, though, to make sure that children are being screened age appropriately and that parents are educated in how to reduce lead risk and the importance of lead screening. And this is me. If you would like to reach out, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwan. Can you see me?
I can see you.
You can see me. Okay, good. All right. So thank you so much for that presentation. I've learned so much today. And, just you talked about the tacos. Every time I go into the store and I see these kids buy these chips, you want to just take it away from them, only because I know the history behind it and the spices that, it has lead in it. And I'm surprised that they're still selling it in the stores. So
because it's not everyone, that's the problem. It's sporadic.
Yeah.
And it's hard to actually nail down exactly what lot and things like that, but it can be a pain.
Yeah.
And it's just an unhealthy color.
Yeah. Well,
That
thank you.
artificial coloring. And the kids love it. They love Takis.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are made, if you flip over the package and if it says made in the United States, distributed in the United States, they have not been associated with any elevated blood levels. The ones that have been associated, or if you flip it over and it says made in Mexico, distributed in the United States, those ones have been linked.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Well, I do have some questions here for you. How long does lead removal take? Is there any way for people to go to these communities and remove lead in a timely manner?
Yes. So I'm assuming we mean in the home.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on, there's different methods, and it depends on where the lead source is in the home. But you can do, so there's lead stabilization and those techniques. So you can use something called an encapsulant, which can be used on any surface that is not a friction impact surface. An encapsulant is paint-like, but it is not paint. Mm-hmm. It binds to the lead, but it looks like a thick paint, but it's actually it's not a paint product. And it binds to the lead, and you would brush it on the wall or paint it on the wall. That's the quickest method, is using encapsulants. Also, you can do enclosure, which is if the wall is leaded, you can put a thin piece of like sheetrock over that lead and that leaded wall, and so it's encapsulated behind that. Those are the easiest, fastest ways. And again, it really depends on how much lead there is in the house, right? My stained glass windows were easy. I just had to encapsulate them in regular glass, so you could still see the pretty stained glass.
Wow.
That was no problem. But it's the walls had been plastered enough times that lead is behind that plaster. So. Right.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. I have another question. Obviously, childhood exposure is most important, but are adults also at risk?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So New Jersey, adult lead falls under our occupational exposures, and certain occupations actually have to be tested for lead periodically, and then they will receive outreach if their lead level is elevated. So a lot of bridge workers, they all have to be tested periodically. There's certain professions that have to.
Good, thank you. What is the difference between dust wipes and filter paper for testing of lead?
Okay, dust wipes are what you would use. Filter paper is a blood test. Mm-hmm. Dust wipes are what you would use in an investigation. It's almost like a baby wipe, but it's not a baby wipe. And you wipe down 1 square foot of a surface, and then you send it to a lab, and the laboratory tests it for lead.
Wow, got it. Okay, great, thank you. Where to refer children with elevated lead level in New Jersey?
So their local health department, if they have an elevated blood level, as long as it was reported to the state, what happens is that all of the blood levels, elevated and non, come into our program. And then based on where the child resides, then that health department has to provide in-home nurse case management and environmental investigation based on our law, which is NJAC 851. Mm-hmm. And they will then it automatically goes to that health department, and they have to provide nurse case management and environmental.
Got it.
But if you ever have a question, just call us. People call me all the time.
Okay, great. Who pays for the required childhood lead testing?
So the state of New Jersey provides local health departments with the ability to test children for all uninsured or underinsured. Also in the state of New Jersey, all insurance has to cover a childhood lead blood test. So if we're talking about that, if we're talking about the actual environmental, that would go in and test the home. If the child has an elevated blood level, that is covered by that health department. We give out grants for that.
Okay. That's good to know. My daughter attends a Catholic school. The building is very old. I'm wondering how could I find out if the school has been tested for lead?
So, you can call the school and ask them. As long as, again, remember, as long as the lead is intact, it's similar to asbestos, right? Then it doesn't cause a problem. It's when it starts to break down and flex off is really the issue. But you can call the school and see if they were tested. All schools had to provide water testing for lead to the state of New Jersey, and DOE has that information, Department of Education.
Great. I find it to take longer for lead to be abated if the homeowner chooses to remove it themselves. These doesn't appear to be a time limit for the homeowner.
So the environmental investigator, the lead inspector risk assessor, if it's not occurring in a timely manner, they can issue a summons. They have that ability to do that.
Good, thank you. And are there any reasons for a blood level to spike even after the hazards have been removed?
Yes. So sometimes, either there's a new exposure, or it might also be rebound, right? So if a child has a really high blood level and it settles in, say, like the bone, when that child goes through a a growth spurt, that blood level can shoot up. It should never be higher than the original blood test, right? So that original elevated blood level, that rebound should never be higher than that. And what we will see is over time that the rebound spikes will become less, and then they will occur over a larger period of time, right? So instead of every 6 months, the increments will go down in what the elevated is, and then it'll take longer and longer periods of time. It's usually under stress, right? So and growth spurts are taxing on the body.
Okay, that's good to know. I do see a few people have their hand raised. If you have questions, please enter it in the chat box. I'm sorry, in the Q&A box, and I'll make sure to get to your question. Has autism is related to lead poisoning?
There are certain studies that it hasn't been ruled out. There are certain studies that have found links. Some have found no links. It needs further investigation. Some of the studies have found that children who were diagnosed as autistic actually were blood lead poisoned. So it needs much further investigation to fully grasp what's going on with that.
Okay. Then someone just commented and said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Pappas. The scenarios where lead occurs is a rare situation was the most informative for me. Who would have known?" And I do agree with that, especially with the cat.
The cat was amazing. We had to dust wipe a cat. We had to literally take that wipe down the cat, and then send it to the lab to test, which is crazy.
Wow, that is good to know.
I was very embarrassed when I finally said, they were like, "Do you think it like the cat?" And I was like, "Dust wipe the cat." The words came out of my mouth, and I was shocked that I had to say it. But
wow, well, that is good to know. I mean, and from that point on, what did they do? Did they keep obviously the cat away from, I'm assuming, the baby, right?
So what they did was they kept the cat away from the windowsills.
Okay.
And they removed all of the sills that had lead and replaced them, and actually put like a guard around so that the cat couldn't get up on that. And they had to take the cat to the groomer, which I'm sure was fabulous.
Wow.
So cats don't like getting groomed. They don't like baths. So, but that's actually what they did. Then they thoroughly cleaned the entire house from top to bottom, washed everything, every stuffed animal. I don't like stuffed animals. They contain the lead dust goes on them. They're also increased for asthma too. I'm just gonna throw that out there. My children are obsessed with them, but they are the bane of my existence. But washed everything down just to make sure that no lead dust was around, because cats climb on everything, right? They do.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. For those who are having trouble to downloading the handout that I attached to the chat, I will send it to everyone who attended the webinar today. Dr. Pappas, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to present on such an important topic. As we know, based off the information you provided, this is still an issue today. And after I close out of the webinar, you should be able to receive the evaluation. If you have any problems with the evaluation, if you did not receive it, just send me an email. But just to be on the safe side, I'll send that out to the group as well. And let me just double check here. Just everyone saying thank you. It was very enlightening and interesting.
And thank you for having me. This was wonderful. And anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to my program.
Yes. This is Dr. Pappas' information here. And again, that information is on the slide, so I'll make sure to attach that handout to you in the email. Well, thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you again, Dr. Pappas.
Have a great day. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.